The decision came suddenly, though it had been brewing for years. The man, once known as Samuel Carter, left behind his home, his possessions, and his name. The city had drained him, the noise, the people, the expectations. He craved silence, the unbroken stretch of open country, where the horizon met his ambition. His journey began in Montana, where the forests whispered secrets through the rustling pines. He moved southward, trekking across empty roads and forgotten trails, sleeping under the stars and surviving on what nature provided. Each day, he distanced himself further from the constraints of society, the artificial demands of modern life. But solitude had its own voice, one that spoke in haunting echoes. At first, he welcomed the quiet, the absence of human chatter, the relief of being unseen. But as the weeks stretched into months, something began to follow him, a shadow at the edge of his vision, a whisper carried by the wind. The descent into isolation. The further Samuel traveled, the more he noticed the strangeness in his own thoughts. At first, it was small things, talking to himself in long-winded monologues, laughing at jokes with no punchline. But as the days blurred together, his grip on reality began to slip. He would wake in the middle of the night convinced someone had whispered his name, only to find the woods silent. He started leaving notes for himself, scribbled onto scraps of paper, detailing what day it was, what he ate, what he saw, just to prove he still existed in some kind of structure. His dreams were the worst. They were no longer just dreams but something deeper, something clawing at the edges of his mind. Faces of people he had left behind morphed into grotesque smiles, their voices stretched and hollow. Some nights, he dreamed of cities, but not as they were, cities that had rotted away, their streets filled with silent figures who all turned to look at him at once. And always, the whisper. "You are not alone." Samuel convinced himself it was simply his mind unraveling under the weight of solitude. But then, he started seeing the footprints. The footsteps that weren't his own. Somewhere in Colorado, deep in the wilderness, he came across them, fresh prints in the dirt. But they weren't his. And they weren't human. They were elongated, like the skeletal imprint of a hand, but stretched unnaturally long. He bent down to touch one, feeling the dampness of the earth. It was recent. Someone, something, had been here. He moved on, walking faster than usual, but the next morning, another set appeared near his campsite. Closer. That night, he forced himself to stay awake. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant howling of coyotes. Then, just past midnight, he heard it. A sound unlike any animal he knew, ragged, rasping breath, just beyond the trees. He gripped the knife he kept at his side, but no attack came. Just breathing. Watching. By dawn, he was already gone, putting miles between himself and whatever had lingered in the dark. The burden of knowing. As his journey stretched onward, Samuel became acutely aware of the world's blindness. Cities bustled with people engrossed in trivial concerns, money, gossip, social media. They wasted their lives arguing over the mundane while real horrors lurked in the unseen corners of existence. Hadn't he witnessed it himself? The shadow in the trees, the footsteps in the dirt, the whispers that reached into his soul? Every time he passed through civilization, he felt more and more detached. He would sit in a diner and watch people scroll endlessly on their phones, laughing at jokes that had no meaning. A man in a suit would argue over the price of his coffee, oblivious to the vast and hungry darkness that Samuel now understood all too well. How could they not see it? How could they be so blind? The paranoia deepened. If they could ignore the truth, did that mean they were part of it? Were they the ones whispering? Were they leading him into a trap? He spoke less and less. He avoided eye contact. He knew too much, and the world around him resented him for it. The journal. In a ruined farmhouse in Kansas, he found a journal. It was old, the pages brittle, filled with entries eerily similar to his own experiences. "I left to find freedom," one passage read. "But something found me instead." His breath hitched. The final entry, scrawled in uneven, desperate strokes, sent a chill down his spine. "If you are reading this, you are not alone. And you never have been." Samuel turned, heart pounding. In the dim light, a shadow moved in the doorway. He had spent so long running from the world, but now he realized something had always been running with him. He had believed himself to be the last good man in a world of monsters, but as he stared into the dark figure before him, he understood the truth. He was just another monster, too. The whispers had been right all along.